is a little bit too long. So really excited to hear from Commissioner Beth Bye today, as well as Peter Denious, who is the President and CEO at Advance Connecticut. Before I do introductions of our panelists, I'd like to first start by noting a few kind of housekeeping items. So we will be recording the session today. And so if there is someone perhaps that you shared the invitation with and they were unable to log on, no worries, we will make sure that we get you a link so that you can share it, so that others can hear some of the valuable information that we'll be discussing today. Also, later on, after we hear from Peter and Commissioner Bye, we will have the opportunity to hear from you directly, our participants, and accept your questions. So I wanted to just note, we'll be accepting questions in the Q&A function. You'll find it towards the bottom of your screen. If you don't actually see Q&A, if you see 3 dots that says more and you click that, that's how you can submit the questions that will come to me so that I can ask them of our panelists. I wanted to make sure that everyone knows how we will be engaging with each other today. So first, I'd like to start by introducing Peter Denious. As I mentioned, he is the President and CEO at Advance Connecticut. Peter leads Advance CT as its president and CEO. He came to Advance CT in August of 2019 as an accomplished private equity and venture capital professional who helped realize commercial and economic opportunity by connecting ideas, people, and capital. For the previous 17 years, Peter worked with Flag Capital based in Stamford, Connecticut. He was a member of the senior leadership team responsible for growing the Flag private equity platform to over $6.5 billion. And so that was an amazing accomplishment. We're really excited to welcome Peter today. He graduated from Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College and is also a board member of the Center for Private Equity and Venture Capital. Our other panelist today is Commissioner Beth Bye from the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood Education. Beth was appointed Commissioner for the Connecticut Office of Childhood Education by Governor Lamont in January 2019. Commissioner Bye also served in the Senate from 2011 to 2019 and in the House from 2007 through 2010. She led an office that was created in 2013 to coordinate and enhance various early childhood development programs and create a cohesive early care system, which we know is very critical, especially as we talk about moving the Connecticut economy forward and ensuring that we have a pipeline that can step into all of the various job opportunities that will exist. And so I'm really happy to have both of you joining us today. Peter, I know that you are in Texas, and so a special thanks to you for making the time today to log on for FCA. So before I begin our discussion, I'd like to first turn it over to Peter. Peter, I know you have some slides that you'll be sharing with us just to walk us through some of the work that Advance CT is doing.
Great, thanks Cheryl so much. And just a quick sound check. Everybody, can you hear me okay? And video's working? Okay, I'm getting nods and thumbs up, great. It's a pleasure to be with you. A lot of thanks to Rob, to FCA, obviously Cheryl and Beth, great to be with you both. FCA, you are doing fabulous work. As you know, I'm a big fan, I'm a big supporter, and I think it's just great and super excited to be involved in this conversation. I do have, I promise, not more than 4 PowerPoint slides. The last thing I want to do is put you all to sleep. It's lunch hour, and I realize that, so I'm going to move through this relatively quickly. And let me make sure that I am sharing my screen properly. Can you all see it? I am screen sharing, okay. Sorry, just give me thumbs up if you're seeing it. Yeah, great. Okay, good. Thanks. So this is just a quick primer on Advance and who we are and what we do. And I'll let you read that at your leisure while I'm just giving you a little bit of a voiceover. We're essentially a public-private nonprofit organization. We're funded by the state. We're also funded by our members, our private sector members. And the governor really got this organization turbocharged back a couple of years ago when I joined, seeing an opportunity to really partner with the private sector and to get it really involved in this mission to move Connecticut forward and do it much more effectively and aggressively than has been done historically. So I joined, as I said, 2 years ago. I was in the private sector. Cheryl gave you my incredibly boring resume, so I won't bore you with that. But you may ask, why am I in this role? And the reason I'm in this role, to make a very long story short, well, I'll quickly just share with you that when I was first approached about this role, I was quick to dismiss it. I was of the view that Connecticut was not in a great place, that it was going to be a very heavy lift to change the direction of travel for our state. And after a lot of conversations and frankly getting smart on what was going on in Connecticut, meeting with the governor and his team, I came to the view that we could do a much better job as a state. And I love a good challenge. And so I assumed the leadership of what is today Advanced CT. So very quickly, what we do is we focus on keeping businesses here, as you can see in the upper left. We focus on also on attracting new businesses to come to Connecticut. We help and market the state, and then we get involved in some very select economic development projects. One of which is enumerated on the lower left there, and it's the Economic Action Plan. And I want to spend a little bit of time on that because it very nicely dovetails into the conversation that we're having here today. I would also just highlight, we work very closely with the governor and his economic development team. It's the state agency is DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development. They are our partner, and obviously folks like Beth, the governor, et cetera, many folks involved. Obviously on the public sector side, we're trying to bring that private sector orientation, leverage the private sector that's already here, and as I said, get them involved in moving our state forward. So back to the Economic Action Plan. You may be aware, and this is a publicly available document, but after it was announced that the federal government was going to be injecting substantial stimulus into the economy, the governor created a framework and some priorities. And as you'll see, if your eye just kind of glances across the page here, these were really the strategies and the areas of focus that the governor laid out as being top priorities. I think, again, many of these jive with the conversation we're having here today. I would point out in the middle column, creating a more affordable Connecticut, of course, supporting the great work that you're going to hear about from Beth and the Office of Early Childhood and supporting families and childhood needs. This was obviously particularly acute coming through the pandemic, and you'll hear about a lot of what's going on in that area. Economic growth is the pillar, second from the right there, that we spend the most of our time on at Advanced CT. And I'll rewind with you to say that we, in partnership with the governor and his economic team, built a strategy back pre-pandemic that was folded into that vision that I just showed you and is now in the process of being rolled out and being implemented. This is a very ambitious, incredibly well thought out, receiving a lot of input from many different stakeholders across the state. I think it was over 50 individuals involved in shaping this from 90 organizations statewide, working with consultants and a small army of people. Again, all this work done pre-pandemic and then modified as we came through and out of the pandemic to fit with the governor's broader strategy that I showed you on the Our slide. So a lot here. We obviously can't get into it. It's beyond the scope of this call, but you see the punchline, 16 different initiatives with a focus on creating over 80,000 jobs and a public sector contribution of just shy of $1 billion. That the idea and the design of this is for that to be matched 1-to-1 by the private sector. So really it's a $1.8 billion of investment across those 4 pillars that comprise that plan that, as I said, is being rolled out as we speak. And we're going to talk about some of the things that are embedded in each one of those, particularly workforce. And I'll pause there and let us move on to, I know Beth and others want to get involved here. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think that some of the information that you presented on the slides, it's actually very helpful in setting the stage for our conversation today in terms of a path forward to a thriving and inclusive economy. In particular, the 4 pillars that you outlined, I think our conversation today and also the remarks that we will hear from Commissioner Bye really dig into those first 2 pillars in terms of investing in vibrant communities and building a workforce that's able to meet industry demand. Commissioner Bye, again, it's very excited to have you joining us today. NCC is home to a child development lab school that provides services to NCC students and working parents from the surrounding area. And I know especially during COVID, I've been very grateful of all the guidance and feedback that you and your team have been providing to NCC and other child care providers. I know that you have some slides, so maybe we'll start by having you go over the slides that you have and then sharing a little bit about some of your advocacy surrounding access to quality, affordable child care and some of the recent investments that Connecticut has made in that area.
Sure. Thank you so much, Cheryl and Peter. It was great to see your presentation. One of the pillars that was investing in our future was missing the universal home visiting and childcare, but I know there wasn't enough space for everything. But I think one of the hallmarks of Governor Lamont's administration, and it's so amazing to be a part of it, is a collaboration across agencies. And Vanessa Durantes from DCF, Deidre Gifford from DSS and DPH, now Commissioner Zutani, and Vicki Veltri from the Office of Health Strategy have been planning a universal home visiting and community health worker pilot that will take some of the ARPA funds to address the inequities that we see in maternal health outcomes and early childhood outcomes, and get in a position to support families from the start, which we believe will make a really big difference. I was torn coming here today because we were invited to the speaker's office, the commissioners, to talk about the early childhood behavioral health crisis that we're facing. I sent my very skilled Elena Trueworthy from the Head Start office to talk about it. But I think that these issues that Peter is talking about, and this prevention lens starting in the earliest years, making Connecticut the most family-friendly state in the nation, does 2 things. It helps children and families, and it helps our economy. And so working across agencies, we're able to leverage federal dollars and really work on creating that culture where we value education and brain development from the very minute a child is born and even before. So I'm just going to share a very broad slide that we've created for, we are working on multiple levels to make sure that as we build back better, that we are working with business and industry as well as early childhood advocates and giving families a voice. So we have sort of 3 prongs right now pushing us to create a system built for 2021. We have an early childhood system in Connecticut that was built for 1990. Because I think parents haven't had enough voices at the table and industry hasn't had really a voice at the table in terms of what's needed in terms of childcare for them. Providers have had a voice at the table, which is great. And we've had local councils with a voice, but I think this is a time for all of us to take a breath and take stock as a state and make sure that all the stakeholders have a say in what's happening out there for early childhood and understand how important those first 5 years are. I had the good fortune of hearing Dr. Bruce Perry yesterday on a national call talk about how much we invest in workforce development and how much we invest in early childhood education. And the brain is most vulnerable in the first 5 years, and we spend about 1/10 per child. And then at the other end, we're trying to fix a system where the student, definitely interventions make a difference, offering career pathways. Cheryl, you see in your work every day how education in early adolescence and beyond changes people's lives. But we've really got it a little bit backwards, which is why Governor Lamont's proposal to invest in the workforce, in the early childhood system early, starting at birth, is so important. So we know that investing in early childhood is important for business because, you know, it's both helping early brain development, which helps the workforce later, and it saves government a lot of money. Jim Heckman, Nobel Prize winner in economics from the University of Chicago, says that early childhood is the best investments that any government can make. Yet governments keep building stadiums saying that's economic development, when the amount to build a stadium for billionaires would really fund early childhood for a whole state. So he's in Minnesota. Art Rolnick is in Minnesota, where they just built a stadium. So he always uses that example. Art Rolnick is another economist who talks about this. We also know that a lack of childcare, and I think in Connecticut we say preschool is childcare and childcare is preschool. We all learned last year that schools are childcare, right? That is something the pandemic taught us. Well, preschool is childcare too. So I really put them all together in terms of an early learning system. It helps keep parents working. It brings in money for business and the government in terms of taxes and profits. It has a huge impact on Connecticut's gross domestic product. And as we know from Norwalk, it's creating a workforce in and of itself. At your lab school, you're training the future early childhood providers for our state. We also know that early childhood education can address inequities. Think about this. In Connecticut, 94% of families of color cannot afford high quality infant toddler care. That alone should get all of us, you know, off of our seats and recognizing the importance of early childhood. And then I'm just going to scroll through because you asked about how we spent the federal funding. We've just received, our whole office is like a $250 million state appropriation, and we've received well over $300 million in the past 18 months. So we have put dollars out to make, the governor, it was really important to him to make sure parents had access to free and low cost childcare. That we invested in quality. He said, if we're going to use these monies, we're going to make sure we don't lose the high quality program. So we're going to increase what we pay for high quality childcare. And that's going to go on after the pandemic. And then we've sent almost 160 million. I'm sure it's over 160 million. I made this slide when President Biden came to town in the White House. We met with the White House and they say, give us a simple way to see how you spent these relief dollars. So more than 160 million in grants to childcare programs so they can stay open. And then behavioral health, there are tremendous stresses out there. We've increased our funding for early childhood behavioral supports and childcare programs to help children not get expelled and support families with their child's behavioral challenges. And then working with the community colleges and CSCUs, we've put about 4 million into making sure the lab schools can survive, just like we had to provide the 160 million for programs. We had to provide funding to make sure the lab schools can provide. We've just signed that MOU, and the funds will be coming so that lab schools can both support students who need childcare and support their own infrastructure because there are tremendous workforce needs coming our way if the human infrastructure bill passes Congress that will dwarf these dollars, and they'll be coming every year. And the bill calls for childcare and early childhood educators to be paid the same as public school teachers, which will drive more people into the field. In early childhood at the community colleges, we've seen a 60% drop in the number of people going into early childhood education in the past 7 years. And that's really troubling, but it's the lowest paid profession in the state of Connecticut. So we can't expect, with all the focus on return on investment, people to go into early childhood education. I always, Peter, sitting on the Governor's Workforce Council, I always get so frustrated that it's like we're pushing people into high pay fields and not talking about how do we increase the pay of high importance fields. It's a more complex solution, but the quality of early childhood educators is super important for workforce development in the later years. So I'll stop there, and I have other slides only if topics come up, but I wanted to both set us in why early childhood is so important, and then what have we done with the federal funds with the child care crisis that we're facing in Connecticut.
I would just dovetail on that a little bit, Beth, because I tell you, when we're out talking to companies, it's very clear to us that the power dynamic, if you want to call it that, between employer and employee has shifted in favor of employees. And employees are looking for the kind of support services that we are rolling out. We're already, doing here in Connecticut. It's a huge part of what we are out selling as we go about talking about our state to others that are not here.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I think that's really an important point that you made, Peter, in terms of kind of the roles shifting. And Commissioner Bye, thank you for sharing some of that information in terms of some of the federal and state resources. I'm wondering if, and this is really a question for both of you, if you can maybe share your thoughts on what, if any, role you think businesses are now willing to embrace, or whether or not they are now motivated to really explore some additional ways to support workers, in particular, low-income workers and workers from underrepresented populations.
Well, I can tell you there is, and Peter just sort of alluded to it, there's tremendous interest among business. And Governor Lamont had CEOs and CBIA to his home about 3 months ago, where we talked about their needs and how the state can respond to their needs, but also what can they do? And so we're really surveying employers right now in Connecticut to say, what are you willing to do? Whether it's subsidize your worker childcare, whether you want to open your own childcare program on site, and how can we make this work? And what are the hours you need childcare? So working with the Governor's Workforce Council, we have a whole work group that's sort of reaching out to business to hear sort of what they're willing to contribute to this effort. And also figuring out, in Connecticut, a lot of these decisions are made at the local level in terms of early childhood opportunities in that community, like full day, half day, wraparound. We worked on legislation last year to add business as a member of the local school readiness councils to give more of a voice there. We also added that parents have to be 25% of the population. So we feel like both of those things sort of address what was a weakness in the voices at the table.
Yeah, so obviously the support services that Beth is talking about are absolutely mission critical, as I've already said, and I think childcare is topping the list. Absolutely. I think the next big bucket, and this is part of a much broader national conversation, is obviously labor and skills. And here again, I want to say credit to Governor Lamont and the Governor's Workforce Council for making business part of that conversation. And the holy grail in workforce, as I've come to learn and fully appreciate, is that oftentimes business is not involved, is not part of the conversation. And you've got kind of a ivory tower effect, where institutions go off providing skills and training that they think are what the market needs. The governor's workforce strategy flips that on its head and starts the conversation, much like Beth just talked about, with business. So part of that strategy is what's called the regional sector partnerships. And these are industry-led working groups, essentially, across our key clusters, where if you think of kind of the proverbial conference room table, around the conference room table would be business first, and then behind business in the next concentric ring of chairs are educators. And the folks with the loudest voice is the business community, and they are defining what they need in terms of skills to meet the challenge that we're all reading about every day, this labor, massive labor challenge that we're having as a country and certainly in Connecticut. So lots more to say here, but I want to say as we look and extend this conversation outside family services, absolutely mission critical, as I said, in my opinion, skills and workforce and making sure that we're providing the right kind of talent to our companies and the companies that want to be here is again another mission critical part of delivery.
Peter, I love your picture, and my picture's different, but because where we sit, and I think this is exactly why Connecticut's doing well, because we're looking at both. And to me, if you put children and families at the center, and families get what they need, and children's brains get what they need in those early years where executive function and those basic life skills of taking turns, working together, being responsible, cleaning up after yourself, all these things that sound very small, sitting at circle and listening to a story. Having been an early childhood educator for many years, I can tell you that give me any 3-year-old or younger, anyone with a good teacher and a high quality early childhood setting, we can get that child to get executive function skills. I have had countless 4.5-year-olds who missed out on preschool. They come in at 4.5, and kindergartens are dealing with this too. Best teacher, director in the classroom a lot, working to help this child grow their executive function skills, those skills that are going to help them forever. And I think if you ask employers in terms of attitude, skills, and knowledge, that when you listen to employers' complaints about the current workforce, so many of the challenges are those executive function challenges, the decision-making, the impulse control, all those things that happen in the first 3.5 years of life. We'd have a much stronger workforce if we put children and families at the center, like we've been supporting this whole effort in Connecticut around a child development campaign for families to help everybody understand child development better, so parents have appropriate expectations. And so I think business belongs in the circle, but I would put children's early development in the center of the circle that ultimately leads to business having what they need. And frankly, us spending less on schools because of the high expense of special education when children miss out, and the utter lack of a system for children 0 to 3. I mean, in Connecticut, even if you have wealth, 80% of families living at 2 times the federal poverty level cannot access high quality infant toddler care. And you want to talk about the brain being even more vulnerable, those first 3 years are so important. So I think it's both and. We need to really, as I've said, we need businesses' voice at the table in terms of what do they need. And we need families' voice at the table in terms of what they need. And then those two things, and we're off.
Completely agree. Cheryl, you may want to take us in a different direction, but I think these are inextricably linked, as is abundantly clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking, as Commissioner Bye, you were sharing those sentiments, that I think coming out of COVID, one of kind of the silver linings I'm seeing is that I feel like never before have we've all agreed on how critical it is to really focus on kind of the interdependent relationship that exists between developing a workforce and childcare. I want to make sure, because I see questions coming in, so I want to make sure that we have some time to get to the questions that are coming in through the chat. So I'm going to start. So the first question, what is the plan to support childcare programs with finding qualified staff? The pandemic has resulted in a staffing crisis for the childcare field.
Yeah, it's a huge crisis right now. There are a few things that we are doing. First of all, of that 158 million that we've sent out, the requirement was the programs had to give 25% of their grants directly to their workforce. So they had to give them, they could give a bonus, they could pay their health care for 6 months, however they wanted to do that, but that of all the dollars that went out, 25% had to go right into the pockets of the workforce. We were unique in that way in Connecticut. The other thing that we're doing, we're getting ready to release sort of bonuses by degree in our state-funded programs. So this is a program we want to set up for the long run, where as people achieve different levels of degrees in early childhood, they receive a one-time bonus. But in order to start that, we need to get everybody in the early childhood sort of registry, the workforce registry first. And so we're going to pilot it with the state-funded programs. That's another way. We're also collaborating on a new job board because centers are paying $50, $100 to Indeed, and they're getting no applicants at all. So we're going to create a job board online for early childhood programs and staff. That'll be statewide, where people can go look for jobs, and centers can post jobs that don't cost anything. We're also working with the community colleges to create clear pathways. You know, it's really complicated. We've made it way too complicated. And Peter, I think if you looked at the pathway to an early childhood teacher degree, you'd be like, oh my goodness, it's so confusing. We have to make it really simple and clear. So we're working on a document, and we're also working on a PR campaign right now that will be ready very soon, just putting it out there in the public and on social media that early childhood is a great career. And then that will link them to the community colleges, to the job board, to just try to create more people coming in the funnel. But the real deep-seated issue is the pay. I mean, the dollars we've sent out were one-time dollars. If I'm running a business and I get one-time dollars, I can't give everyone a $2 an hour raise because those dollars are going away. So the real answer is passing this human infrastructure bill in DC, and that would bring enough money to Connecticut to make sure that early childhood providers are paid on par with public school teachers. That's the real fix.
Thank you, Commissioner Bye. Just to maybe follow up a little bit on that question in terms of developing pathways. Commissioner Bye, you were talking about developing pathways to the child care profession. Peter, it would be helpful maybe to kind of hear your thoughts in terms of what you're hearing out there from business and industry in terms of what educational institutions and organizations can do to better create pathways from community colleges and directly into the workforce and into some of the businesses that are here in Connecticut.
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's an area of deep focus, certainly for us as partners with the state in trying to get these workforce initiatives off the ground that are part of that broader economic action plan that I alluded to before. I'll point to one that is up and running, and Cheryl, I'm guessing you're familiar with the governor's announcement to really get behind the Google certificate program that is going to be deployed through our community colleges across the state. We are the first state to actually take this initiative to make it happen and to fully fund it. And as we all know, COVID has disproportionately impacted our lowest wage earners, our communities of color. This is a great way, and frankly, the whole heart of the governor's workforce strategy is, particularly post-COVID, is on reskilling and upskilling and taking people from displaced industries like the restaurant industry, like the retail industry, like the hospitality industry, and if they want it, providing a pathway and a set of tools to allow them to find better work and higher paying work and get them back on their feet by providing that, that infrastructure. I would also point to another initiative that we have taken on ourselves at Advanced CT, which is looking at our occupational licensing framework in Connecticut. We did some initial analysis and came to the conclusion that Connecticut ranks 50th out of 50 states for the complexity and the sheer number of occupational licenses that we have. We believe very strongly, and there's very good data on this, that this is an issue of equity and inclusion that, you know, talk about inhibiting a pathway. If you want to enter the trades in Connecticut, you have no idea how to do it when you start to look at what license you might need in a given sector. There's a very easy call to action here. Easy, I say, it's not easy, but there is a path to action here to simplify, to streamline and clarify so that, Cheryl, back to your question, what can the state do to open those pathways? This is one that we think is low-hanging fruit. We've done a lot of benchmarking against other states, looking at best practices, and we see clear room for improvement here. So this is another conversation that is underway, all part of trying to address some of the fundamental issues that we're having coming out of COVID, and of course make Connecticut a more attractive place to live, work, and play and thrive. And do it obviously in an inclusive way.
Peter, can I just add on to that one thing? When I was chair of higher ed, I was so disgusted with some of the predatory higher ed institutions in the state who tell people, come get your HVAC here. Kids go, they use their Pell Grants, they can't get certified, and they have to start all over again. And I don't think we've done nearly enough to crack down on these programs because they're very good. They make their money by recruiting and then having people not finish. We've got to crack down on these programs that are really stealing from our young adults, mostly ones who have Pell Grants, so people who are already low income. And some of these for-profit schools are really taking kids out of the pipeline that we need and the pipeline that we know is going to bring them to a job.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Beth. And, you know, there's obviously a lot of talk about skills-based hiring. And, you know, you don't necessarily need a 4-year college degree and to go take on enormous liability to achieve that. What you need are skills to survive in today's economy, at least from an employment standpoint. And that's why, again, we're, you know, laser focused on helping the governor roll out that those workforce initiatives. And I'll tell you, we're talking to a company based in New York today that is talking to Connecticut because we have programs already stood up that are focused on skills and not degrees, and retraining and upskilling, particularly in light of this Google certificate program that I mentioned earlier, is extremely attractive to them. And so that's one reason why we're on the radar screen. And so it's got enormous payoffs if we can make it happen.
Yeah, so it seems like there are really some areas of opportunity for the state and for under Governor Lamont's leadership to really make some headroads regarding this issue in terms of challenges to entering the workforce and connections to affordable and accessible childcare. One of the recent changes under the Lamont administration is will go into effect in 2022. So Connecticut will have paid parental leave beginning in 2022. I'm wondering if maybe both of you could spend a little bit of time on sharing your thoughts on the impact that this will have on businesses as well as lower income families.
You know, Cheryl, I think it's tremendous for, again, young babies' brains, and that parents can stay home and tend their babies during those early years of development. And I've been a supporter of this policy for a long time. That said, I'm hearing from childcare programs whose workers are worn out and exhausted because we've talked about the workforce shortage. And there are concerns that many of them will take leave once they can do that and get paid because they're just exhausted and could easily qualify under, some kind of illness or need for respite. So there are two sides of this coin. Childcare provider, the directors are very worried about the impact. So I think we have to wait and see.
Yeah, I have a very similar perspective. Sorry, we're not making for much debate here, Beth, but I think it is it's a two-sided coin, right? On the one, the benefits are obvious, and Beth's been very articulate about those benefits. The flip side is there's a real cost to business, and we're at a point in the business cycle where labor is just very, very challenging to find, and we're giving a program here that will potentially exacerbate that. So agree with Beth. We kind of have to see how it rolls out in 2022. I believe, Beth, if I'm not mistaken, it is not at the moment in Biden's Build Back Better plan, at least in the first wave. But
well, it actually got put back in the House version, but it's not expected to survive the Senate.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be an ongoing national conversation. One thing we think about very carefully at Advanced CT is what are other states, our competitor states doing? Our Northeastern peers, really all our surrounding competitor states also have paid family medical leave. So as does California and a handful of others. So the benefits differ to some degree in the costs and whatnot, but I do think whether it's the impact on our childcare services industry, or whether it's the impact on our small businesses, which are the lifeblood of our state, we have to be mindful that this has got potential kind of knock-on effects.
Peter, I was glad to hear you mention that oftentimes at Advanced CT, you're taking a look at models and what some of our neighboring states are doing. I'm wondering if you have encountered some models in terms of addressing workforce challenges and filling that pipeline, and if there are models that exist at other states that you think that they are doing something that perhaps Connecticut should consider doing as well.
Well, again, the Governor's Workforce Council and the Office of Workforce Strategy, OWS, which sits inside the Governor's administration, is really point on workforce. Like Beth is point on family services, childhood services, early childhood services. There's a different group that is really focused on workforce. They very smartly went and did a very comprehensive benchmarking study and analysis of what are other states doing. This was all kind of tied together with that economic action plan that I referred to. They involved business, they involved the public sector. They got, again, a lot of input, did a ton of analysis, and came forward with a strategic plan that I think does reflect many of the best practices going on across the country. Most notable of that are those regional sector partnerships, which I mentioned earlier, which I believe 17 other states have implemented. And I know a number of people spoke to others in those states and in those organizations that were standing those partnerships up and asked about their effectiveness and all the rest of it. And I think we, the collective we, Team Connecticut, came to the view that that was a really smart way to go. So there's an example of us looking outside the state, not kind of putting on the blinders and thinking that we know it all, and doing the benchmarking work and coming back with a suite of best practices. And that's what's being implemented and rolled out right now, whether it's the Google certificate program or those partnerships.
Peter and Cheryl, there's one thing that I always have wished we did as a state that Governor Lamont has really started some, but I think both at a higher ed institution and a business policy level. I wish that New England would brand itself. It's a small region, like when you compare us to California or Texas or Florida, we're probably about that size. But if you take, New York to Maine, and you could bring New York in or not, but if we could market our whole region, like our tiny states competing against each other, doesn't make sense. We're trying to, in early childhood, the New England commissioners meet, and we developed a common framework for the relief funds. And it was incredible how much we had in common. And I just don't think we do enough of it. And Governor Lamont, more than any governor I've ever worked with, is working across state lines, realizing those interdependencies, whether it's with transit or the economic development. But I'd love to have an advanced New England, where the state's various agencies could look to collaborate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, Beth. We are a small little part of this massive country. Having said that, just to provide a little bit of counterpoint here, Connecticut has been, as I don't need to tell this audience, flat as a pancake since the financial crisis in terms of economic growth. And I think, again, the reason I took this challenge on is I came to the view that Connecticut had the potential to do a much better job executing a business development strategy, and one that addresses the inequities of our state, which are acute and known to everybody. We have some of the most unbelievable wealth and poverty in our state. And, can we bring jobs to our state? Can we, now back to your point, Beth, do a better job at articulating what is Connecticut's value proposition to companies that might not know what's going on in Connecticut? And as we came to quickly realize, Connecticut really hasn't defined its value proposition outside of our state. In fact, we haven't really defined it to ourselves. And so we're sort of in this stage right now where we are busy talking both inside the state and outside the state, and telling people, and that's why I'm in Texas right now, what we stand for and what is important in our state. What are our strengths? And what kind of industries and demographics do we have that might be interesting to them? And I could go on and on about.
I love it, Peter. I'm so glad you're there.
We have a lot
I
of
hear
work.
you. I just think it can be both and.
Yeah,
I
hear you.
I think Connecticut's the greatest place ever. I mean,
I'm going to
bring
it to I'll bring it to my board meeting next week, and you can share that with all my private sector board members who are determined to get Connecticut into the mix. Anyway,
I don't think I need to check with the governor first, but it's just something I've always thought that we could do a better job, and I've been really proud of the joint work on the stimulus rollout.
I agree, and I have to say I give him high marks for coming through COVID and really coordinating with New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and even to some degree Baker in Massachusetts. And again, COVID has been an incredible challenge. It has really impacted our families, our communities, particularly our communities of color. Are disadvantaged communities, and so it's tragic in many ways. Having said that, we have been, just as a state in general, one of the best performing states after that initial wave, really in the top three, and that I think gets back to just a really sound visions that went into how we close our economy down and then how we reopen it, and it's really diminished what is still, admittedly a tragedy, but it has diminished the impact of COVID. And I don't want to make light of it by any stretch, but it could have been a lot worse.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really just the willingness to continue collaborating across sectors that is truly making the difference. I want to make sure, just because I'm being very mindful of time, that we get to one last question. And not that I'm biased, but it's a question related to the work of FCA. And so I'd like to maybe end with that question that I'll share with you before I pass it over to Rob. So FCA is one of OEC's partners in providing early childhood home visiting services in the Norwich community. Can you speak to the future of universal home visiting as our community looks to develop a prenatal to age 3 system focused on healthy beginnings and supported families?
It would be impossible for me to overstate Norwalk's great work in terms of collaboration, and I know your agency has been part of that. There's I don't know that there's another community that has aligned their early childhood with the public schools so well, and has looked at home visiting and early screening as ways to help advance Norwalk. So we're starting in Bridgeport because Bridgeport has very specifically been focusing on prenatal through age 3 in their baby bundle. And so what we're hoping to do is pilot the value and the cost savings of home visiting in Bridgeport. But while we're doing that, look to do some of the community organizing that needs to happen before universal home visiting is launched. So if we can demonstrate that it actually saves money, which it's been shown all over the country to save money, and the impact on children and family health, then we will be able to go statewide, region by region. And Norwich would be one of those communities that has done a lot to set up for it. But at OEC, we're learning from Norwalk about how do you connect these dots. And those cradle to career communities in Connecticut have had just tremendous impact. And Peter, I'm sure you talk with them and connect with them, but I think it's East Hartford, Waterbury, Norwalk, and I'm forgetting somebody who will be upset with me. But that focus on early childhood, but also jobs at the same time has led to significantly improved services and connections across the town. Stanford, sorry, Stanford.
Thank you, Commissioner Bye. So because that, Commissioner Bye, you had that last question, I think maybe, Peter, I'll ask you to maybe wrap us up just with some of your thoughts in terms of advancing Connecticut forward over the next year and a half and what you see as some of the greatest opportunities that we have.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just close by saying I'm cautiously optimistic that Connecticut is going in a better direction. We still have plenty of challenges, including our 6.8% unemployment rate, which is pretty close to our New England peers, even a little better than a couple of them, but well below the state, the national average. And so we've got to get people back to work. We're all aware of the labor displacement and labor challenges that we're having. So we're focused on bringing jobs to Connecticut and helping the companies that are already here grow and getting out and telling that story. And I'm happy to report that it's beginning to pay dividends. There's a very long lead time, as I've come to learn in economic development, but we've had some recent announcements. We've had probably half a dozen companies deciding to come to Connecticut to open facilities, and some of you may have seen some of those announcements. So the work is beginning to pay dividends. The private sector is engaged and involved. As I mentioned at the top, we are a public-private partnership, and we're trying to work with both sides of that partnership to really turbocharge what has been a pretty anemic economic picture for Connecticut for a long, long time, and doing it in this kind of holistic and inclusive way, working with Beth and coordinating and syncing and working statewide so that we don't get in silos and sort of going off doing things that aren't joined up. So anyway, lots to say, lots of good things going on. It's beginning to pay dividends, a lot more work to do.
Thank you so much, Peter. I know, and thank you to our audience for all the thoughtful questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of them, but we are going to follow up and have the panelists respond to the questions that we did not get to and send out an email after today's webinar. But thank you again for those very thoughtful questions. And thank you, Peter and Commissioner Bye, for your time and some of your thoughtful remarks today. I appreciate it so much. Rob, it is time that I pass it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, Peter, Beth, for a really stimulating conversation. Really do appreciate you giving us your time and your expertise. I come off this call feeling that there is good reason for optimism going forward. I think all of you have noted this is a work in progress, but I, in my role here at FCA over the last 16 years, I don't think 6-7 years ago, I would necessarily say what I just said, which is the sense of real reason for optimism. And thank you for your leadership in all of these different areas. And thank you for helping us kick off what is now going to be a series for FCA. And a quick advertisement, we will be doing another virtual conversation this coming January. And one of the featured speakers, and I know her name has already been used in this conversation, will be the Department of Children and Families Commissioner, Vanessa Durantes. She will be one of our panelists. We will have as a moderator, the Chief of Community Services here in the city of Norwalk, Lamont Daniels. And we will be focusing on an issue that I know came up today, which is the issue of children's mental health, particularly at this time of all of our lives, and especially the issue of childhood trauma, which is obviously a critically important component of childhood mental health. So I hope all who have been able to join us today can join us for that next meeting. And I want to thank our panelists and all who were able to join us today.